I recently made a video about using a medicine ball to help practice your service motion. What I like about the medicine ball is that it allows you to explode and practice driving up on your serve. I had a few comments of people asking for a kettlebell version that they could practice at their home. What I like about the medicine ball is that it allows you to really explode up, and you can alternate between throwing a medicine ball and hitting a real serve, so you can try to merge those two movements to get used to driving up better on your serve. And you're able to do that to an extent when you practice with a kettlebell. So I'm just giving this as a disclaimer. I think that the kettlebell will teach you how to load your balance better. It'll teach you how to stretch better into the coil, but it's going to be a little more difficult to practice that explosive movement. But with that said, I will break down how to use the kettlebell at your house to improve your service trophy position or loading into that position. We can use a kettlebell to practice the Weck method coil, which translates great into what we're doing with a service motion. So a basic refresher of what we're doing with the Weck method coil is that we're having the racket arm, or the side that we're going to be loading the weight, we're kind of having it coming down to the back side of our hip. So we're not having it in the front, and we're not having it just to the side. It's coming down somewhere behind your hip over here. When you're just exaggerating the motion and you're trying to feel the maximum amount of contraction in your backside lat, you can bring your elbow close to your body. Your palm is naturally going to be kind of facing away from your body as you're trying to compress or contract that muscle down right here. If you're doing it correctly, the shoulder line starts to tilt as you're really pulling yourself down into your back hip. It might even get the back hip to kind of raise as you're just getting familiar with this position. When we're actually loading our serve, we don't want to be loading the back hip higher. We're going to have that be lower. But just to feel what we're trying to do in this position, it kind of feels like the shoulder and the hip are getting closer together as you're compressing down. With our lead side arm, you're trying to have the elbow come up high so that these forearms are roughly parallel together. So if I'm loading into this position, I'm here and I'm getting these forearms roughly parallel together. The more that we get a stretch out of this lead side arm running through the length of our arm down our back over here, the more that we start to really get this coil to be happening. So when we're really serving, we're right here, and as we load up, we're getting into this coil position, which is our serving position as well. That's why the coil, or learning how to get comfortable getting a better coil, is going to help you improve your serve. So now as we're picking up the kettlebell, we can have the kettlebell feel like it's loading a lot more at the base of our palm, because we're trying to learn how to support this in a strong position, and supporting it in a strong position is activating more of our serratus anterior, which is the big swing muscle or the boxer's muscle. You might be familiar with it by seeing the ribs that you see in a Batman costume or Batman movies. So the serratus anterior is really responsible for how our scapula, or is one of the main muscles for how our scapula or shoulder blade is coming around our body. And when we're loading in this position, it's a lot like if our forearm is vertical to the sky. So if I was just trying to identify what the serratus anterior feels like, it feels like I'm pushing my elbow forward and this arm is roughly parallel to a wall. So when I'm trying to load this, I'm not really trying to do anything special with my wrist. I just want the weight to feel like it is pushing down at the base of my palm. So I don't want it in my fingertips and putting a lot of stress on my wrist. I want to feel like I'm loading it at the base of my palm, and I'm just pushing my elbow out away. So this is going to be the start, and then as we do it, or to actually apply this to what we're doing for a serving exercise, we're going to move our arm to the side. And if we're in the correct position, we're actually kind of opening up this chest and shoulder muscle. We don't want to have this pinched together. We don't want to have the shoulder push up or in. If we're in the wrong position, we're going to feel this muscle as soft, and it's not stretched at all. If you were to put your left hand, since I'm doing this as a right-handed explanation, if you put your left hand on the connection between the chest and shoulder right here, it should feel like you're kind of opening up the chest and that it's roughly flat. So as you feel that stretch open, that's the position that we want. And if you can see this from the side, my elbow is also kind of in line with the back side of my hip. So my forearm is roughly parallel. The palm is facing up, not because of what I'm doing with my wrist. I'm having the weight at the base of my palm, and I've opened up this chest right here. So this is important because we're trying to put ourselves in a position that is going to help us accelerate the arm up when we want to for serving. So from this position, we can allow the elbow to go back and down a little bit. We're not bringing it as close as we can to our body because we're trying to have this work on a serving motion. When we serve, we do create a little bit of space with our body, or with our elbow. And from this position, we can feel like we're getting our shoulders to tilt down toward this back hip. We don't need to hike up this hip anymore. We're trying to have this be applicable to a serving motion. So we're going to allow this to sink down like if we're serving, and we're going to imagine that we're in our trophy position, but we're trying to work on what we're doing with the coil and how to get out of that position into the serve. So to work on the coil first, we're bringing this arm over the top, and these forearms become kind of parallel, or if you're very flexible, they are parallel. But another way to think about it is having this elbow driving up or driving back behind you. So you can see that my elbow is not only driving up, but it's driving back behind me. And as I do that, I'm getting into a much tighter contraction on this backside right here. So when we're loading in this position, we're here, and from this position, you don't want to let your head just tilt off to the side, because when we're actually serving, we're not serving here, we're looking up to the ball. And so that allows our neck to get a stretch, and it puts us in a better position to see the ball and go after it in the direction that we want. So as I'm loading into this position, I feel like I'm pushing this elbow back behind me, and this is really getting this contraction right here. I have the chest open and I'm pushing down, and as we're getting out of this position, because we're doing this from home, there's a couple of variations that you can do. One, which I think is the safest, is going to be just for you to focus on learning how to drive up. If you're using very light weight, then you can also kind of drive up and throw this out around you. That's not really what's going to benefit your serve the most, because this doesn't allow you to transfer exactly what you're doing at home onto the court. If you were to bring the kettlebell out to the court and practice it, then maybe you could bounce back and forth, but you're trying to train the balance that you're getting and how to load better and how to drive up better. So with that in mind, I think it's best if you just focus on driving up with your arm and finishing right there. So in the coil position, you can see that when we decide to rotate our shoulders, the arm is going to be roughly driving straight up on its own. So to get out of the coil position, we need to engage what we're doing with our hips. So if we imagine that we're at the baseline and we're loading up, we've loaded into our trophy position, and to get out of this into the next position, we first need to engage what our hips are doing. So the hips need to feel like they're starting to turn toward the net, and as they're turning toward the net, then we can allow the feeling of going backwards behind us. So the more that I feel like I'm just going back behind me, the more that this arm is going to naturally rise. So as this arm starts to rise, my hips have turned, the backwards feeling is initiated, and this arm starts to rise. And now I get to the backside of the coil, which would be roughly where my contact is. So the way to practice the kettlebell at your house is getting familiar with the position you want to be in when you're loading. And so this loaded position can be here, or you can extend your arm up like if you've already tossed it and you're in your trophy position. And out of this position, you are allowing the hips to turn first, and you go backwards, and you can see the arm starts to drive up as you get into the coil on the other side of your serve. So what you might have to get familiar with, or what you might have to get comfortable with, is just trusting that this arm movement going up is actually going to be where your racket drop is, or where the racket is falling behind your head. It seems like you're just driving the arm up, but if you were to allow the coil to happen, you can see that the elbow is actually driving up, which gets you into that position to extend out, and it leaves you ready to make contact with the serve. So if I'm here and the hips turn, and now as this elbow is driving up, you can see that the arm is naturally getting into a position that's ready to extend out to hit the shot. So what feels like going vertical when you're applying it to the coil actually puts your arm in the position that you want to be serving. When I'm loading into the trophy position and I'm ready to hit, I can think about this arm going up, but since I'm in the coil, this is allowing that arm to actually drop back behind me as I drive into my serve. So if you're practicing with the kettlebell at your house, you can get yourself into the coil. You can choose to stay like this, or you can choose to extend your arm to get used to your trophy position. And from here, allow the hips to turn, allow the backwards feeling to happen as we drive up, and we can finish at the point of contact. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If you have any questions, make sure to comment and share this video with your friends if you find it valuable.